Alrighty, so this is the next stage of Blender that we're going to go through, and it's going to be done through the lens of creating a model of a house from the very first stage all the way through to a finished render. So I'm going to be going through a lot of the tools that I talked about in the last stage. So being able to move about the canvas, being able to scale and rotate our box and grab it and move it around, all of those tools, and also the loop cut and the extrude tool as well. I'm going to be introducing you to a couple of different tools in addition to that, and also the materials. So everything that we covered in that first 20 minutes, but I'm going to be moving through that all quite quickly. So if you haven't watched the first one, you really need to watch that. Otherwise, you're going to get lost quite quickly in this process. So what we're going to do is, if we flick over to Pinterest over here, I've just found a picture of a house which is kind of roughly what we want to achieve. It's a nice simple structure, it's in the snow, it's got some nice lighting effects, but it's nothing too advanced. It's just going to allow you to really just get your foot in the door with the modeling. So without further ado, we're going to roughly aim for something like this, but have a bit of a free form as well while we're at it. So let's flick back. So first thing we want to do is we want to sit our box onto the floor. See, at the moment it's kind of halfway up the floor. So the best way to start with that is we're going to hit the G button, we're going to hit the Z button to say that we want to move up and down, and then we're going to hit the 1 button. Now that basically just moves it half a notch up, which in this particular case sits it perfectly on the floor. The second thing that we're going to do that you haven't been familiarized with is set the object origin. See, currently, if I scale it up, it scales from the middle, but what that's going to do is it's going to scale it and move it below that floor line. So we need to go Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor, and that's going to, that little sort of weird kind of thing, whatever that is, the 3D cursor, it's going to make sure that everything gets scaled from that and it stays on that ground line. All right, so let's get started. So we'll flick over to here. We're just going to get the rough proportions here. So this kind of gabled area here represents about half the width of the house. So yeah, and it's the gable starts about halfway up. So we get a few kind of these basic dimensions. We're never trying to, well, not in this case, trying to emulate the house perfectly, but we do want to base it off something to get those scales roughly correct. So I'm just going to hit S and Y to kind of expand that. S and X, we don't really know the depth of the house based on that angle, but let's just make it about that wide. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my extrude tool here, grab my face, and I'm going to just double up the size of that. Something like that. Simple as that. Let's go to our loop cut now. I'm going to make a cut there, and I'm going to make a cut and click and drag my loop cut. So see, I'm still holding on the drag there. Click and drag it to about there. That's another little technique that you may or may not be familiar with. Then I'm going to loop cut again. I'm going to make a cut in that center there. And I'm going to now grab these. And as we can see, if we flick over, this is that kind of L chase, I suppose we'll call it. And I'm going to grab my extrude tool. I'm going to extrude that to about half the length. Now, all we need to do to turn that into a gable is grab our outside edges here. Hopefully this works. I haven't actually done it this way before. There's a couple of ways to go about this. Grab that, G and Z. Yeah, look at that. That's created a really nice gable for us. Now, what's happened in this center space here, we've got this weird kind of thing where it's a square, but there's a fold that doesn't have a little fold line. That's called an N-gon, I think. So what you want to do, this is where that knife tool comes in handy. We haven't worked with the knife tool before, so let's click on that. I'm going to click on that corner here and basically say, and hit the enter button, make a little cut there. So it's turned it into 2 triangles instead of kind of a weird folded square. We'll do that with the back. Not that it matters that much with the back. because we're not going to be rendering from there. So that's effectively it. So if we flick back over, we've got this basic house shape happening, which is kind of working out pretty nicely. What I'm going to do now is let's experiment with this. We'll try with the inset faces, see if that works. So that's the one just below the extrude tool. So I've selected all of these faces and now I just want to drag them in a bit. Okay, so you can see what it's doing is it's insetting those faces, surprisingly, because we want to create that kind of that flat look there. So I'm just going to drag it in. I think by eye it was around about there. Now with our extrude, we want to push that back a little bit. And you can kind of see how that's taking form. And then you've got this other inset face here before you get to this window. So I'm going to go back to inset faces, drag that a bit. Then I'm just going to push that back just that little bit, that kind of extrude tool there. So you can kind of see how that's coming about. If we flick back, a couple of other things that we're going to do. We've got this chimney to add in. I've got this kind of little sort of area here. This is a bit of a weird space, so I might just want to whack a window in there just to kind of make it look a little nicer. So let's go about some of that. So let's, to make this little undercover area, I'm going to click and drag, and click and drag to kind of set that undercover area. Now, again, as you're probably starting to predict, I'm going to go to face mode, grab my extrude tool, and I'm just going to pull an area out there. I'm going to pull just another one, like so. And while I've got it, I'm just going to pull one out this way too. So what that allows me is to create this kind of down barrier here. So let's grab that little inside bit there, and we're just going to pull that all the way down. Now, without going too much further, let's add a bit of a ground for this to go on. This, for instance, this could just keep going down because it's going to go through the ground effectively. So Shift A, add a plane, and I'm just going to scale that up. And what I might do is I might G and Z and just lift that plane up a bit so that it's kind of flush with the base of that. So you can kind of see that's starting to come to fruition a little bit. What I might want to do now is I'm going to add, let's just put a nice window there. So loop cut again, I'm going to click and drag, click and drag, click and drag to kind of set my little area for the window. Going to now grab my face select and my extrude. Now we're going to just pop it out a little bit, go to our inset faces, pop it in a little bit, then go back to the extrude button, pop it back a little bit, and there we go. We've got this nice kind of window happening here. All right, so that's looking all pretty good. I'm going to create a bit of an eave on this one. So you're sort of doing this by eye. So you're going to drag it out like this, and then you're going to kind of line it up, G and Z, just to kind of make sure that that eave kind of is a continuation of this line. That's all you really need to do there. It's those details that make it look really, really well finished and well polished. So definitely recommend that you really spend the time going for those details like eaves, because it really makes that design look just extra finished. I'm going to click and drag now because I'm creating a chimney. So you can kind of get this workflow that's starting to happen here. So what I'm going to do is, so I've clicked and dragged, created a whole bunch of lines here, so it's becoming a bit of a mess. Dragging that out, of course you don't want the chimney to run perpendicular, so I'm hitting the Z button while I'm dragging it, and that's just going to lock it into that extrude directly upwards. Now, of course, the chimney needs to be flat, so I'm going to go back into this, going to grab this line, and I'm just going to G and Z. You can just do this by eye. It doesn't need to be perfectly flat. There's ways of doing it much nicer than that, but now I've just noticed that that is a very tall chimney, so I'm just going to G and Z that up a little bit. Presumably, I suppose chimneys need to be above the roof line. I don't know whether that's a thing, but maybe it is. So that's starting to come to fruition a little bit. Now, if we flick back to this, we can see that the house has kind of got this sort of like an outdoor deck type thing. I'm just going to add that as a new shape. So Shift A, add a cube, SZ, and then just S to make it bigger. G, Y, because you want to slide it across. S, there we go. SZ to kind of make it a bit narrower. It had a couple of different levels to it, so you might want to maybe just grab this bit. I'm going to grab my little face select here and extrude that up just a bit to kind of create that second level. Now that's effectively it. So what we can do now, we've effectively finished this model. We've got that base mesh going on. Now it's time to start adding some more materials and start turning it into this finished render. So let's go into our viewport shading mode. So that's looking pretty good. First thing we want to do is, of course, change the render engine to cycles. So we can see here that we've got a pretty cool kind of base mesh going on, which is reasonably good. So we want to start adding some materials to that. So I'm going to click on my house. I'm going to get my little select tool, and I'm just going to select all of the roof. So I'm just holding Shift and clicking and dragging for a kind of a marquee select type thing. Make sure you select all of your little roof panels here, like so. Yeah, something like that. I'm going to go into my materials. I'm going to click the plus, assign, new, and I'm just going to call this roof. And the roof was pretty dark, so let's just make it kind of a grey colour. Oh, we've overshot the mark a little bit. Grab this one again, and I'm just going to assign there. Okay, so we've got this nice roof. Had a little sneaky polygon there that's hidden. There we go. Assign that. You've got yourself your roof. Now we want to zoom in, and if we flick back to this, it had these kind of timber insets. So let's work on them. So I'm going to grab the little timber insets. If it's taking a while to load, you can go back to this mode, which is kind of that in-between mode I was talking about in the previous segment. So it's just a little less intensive on the memory. So it's kind of handy to call on if you're just trying to achieve a result a bit quicker, or if your computer seems to be slowing you down a bit. So again, plus sign, assign, new, and I'm just going to call this timber for now. And I'm going to give it that base color. Just pick a nice sort of rough timber kind of color. Something like that's pretty good. Going to do the same with the chimney. Now that was kind of a bit darker than the roof. So plus, assign, new, chimney. And I'm going to set that base color there to pretty dark. All right, so if we go back into our render mode here, oh, hang on, let's add that timber to the ground as well there. And also, if we flick back to this, it kind of had a sort of a darker colored outdoor area too. So let's work on adding some color to that as well while we're in the thick of it. Actually, let's just make it the same color as the roof. Assign. There we go. That was pretty easy. All right, so let's add the window frames. Let's make them the same as the roof. So I'm just zooming in a bit. Again, just holding Shift to select. We went through that in that first segment there. So we're selecting everything but the glass. And I'm just going to give that the roof texture as well. All right, so if we go into this, starting to look pretty finished, and we were able to achieve this result pretty nice and quickly, so you should be pretty happy with something like that. Let's make this underside timber as well. Assign. This is looking a bit kind of weird, so let's maybe inset that and kind of maybe push it in a bit just to sort of give it a bit more texture, or a bit more kind of add a bit more form, I suppose, to the structure. There we go. We've got a little sneaky polygon there. Let's grab that one. Roof, assign. Thank you. Okay, so now it's time to move on to these windows. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab these windows here, that one there. Now this is a new tool that you're not familiar with. So we're going to go plus, assign, new, and you can just call this glass, and dropping the roughness down to 0, and bumping the transmission up to 1. So now we can actually see inside this house, which is pretty cool. So what we're going to do is we've got our light here. Going to change that to sunlight, probably a bit too bright. Now the house was actually kind of more in the moonlight, so you can kind of see that that's a dusky kind of thing. Drop our sun strength down to 1, something like that. So you're changing that sort of color. And while we're at it, let's just change, let's kind of make it nighttime. Actually, if we're doing that, maybe let's make the sun sort of a bit more yellowish. Yeah, have a bit of a play with that. That's looking pretty good. All right, so now you want to create some internal lights. So this is a new thing that we haven't worked with before. Shift A, light, and we just want to put a point light in there. So that's put one down here. If we just grab that freely, we can drag that up, and we're going to put it inside, but kind of masked out a little bit. We're going to make it a nice sort of yellow light because you want it to kind of be warm. Sort of a warm yellow light. Change the power to maybe 200. So you can kind of see how that's really lighting up the place now, and it's kind of creating that nice sort of set there. Change the radius to 0. And yeah, I think that's looking reasonably nice. You might want to grab this light, Shift D to duplicate, and we'll put a light over here as well. Maybe these lights are a bit too much. Let's drop them down to 100. Maybe that's a bit nicer. Okay, so we can see through here, of course, we've missed a little panel there. So let's go up the back. Let's fix that up. Just going to change that to material and assign so we can see through that. Although, for this back, let's make that that timber color. So if we flick back here, you can see that the roof's made of timber. So now we can actually just make this whole roof timber because you're not actually going to be able to see it in the render. So I'm just going to click assign there, make the whole roof timber, and it's kind of going to see through to that bit there. So yeah, something like that. So now let's do a bit more tricky stuff here. I'm going to grab this glass, just select all of that. Now we want to create some frames for the windows. Now there's a really easy way to do this. So we've got to separate it out first, which is basically means I've selected this window and I hit the P button and then enter. So what that's done is it's turned the glass into its own little shape. So I can click on that glass now, and let's just call that glass. Now to make the frame, Shift D to duplicate that glass again, and we want to turn this into a wireframe. Now that's basically this modifier over here, add modifier, and we're going to scroll all the way down to wireframe. And you can see that that's basically turned that into a wireframe. Pretty cool little tool. And we just want to make that wireframe same as the roof. And you can see there that you got yourself your nice little wireframe happening there. A couple of other cool things that you can do. So there was a bit of lighting happening over here. So what we might want to do is, yeah, let's go ahead and make a light. Why not? YOLO. Shift A. I'm going to make a little cylinder. Cylinder. I'm going to grab that. Now it's only going to be a tiny cylinder, so it's going to be like a can light. S and Z. So there's my little cylinder there. I'm going to zoom into that, and what I'm going to do is let's just give that the roof texture as well. We want it to be dark. Now inside here we actually want to do something that's going to emit some light. So I've got my little extrude and I'm going to push it inwards. Now, so basically it's kind of got this sort of concave thing, and you can see the shape sort of hidden inside there. Plus, assign new, I'm going to call this light. Now I'm going to scroll down to emission. At the moment, emission's black, which means it's not emitting anything. I'm going to change that to white. And I'm going to change the color or the strength, emission strength, to 300 there. Now that's emitting a light now, and I'm just going to hit the S button, shrink that down. So effectively, we've got ourselves a little can light here. So I'm just going to grab that like so. This is where that grab tool really comes in handy. You don't know where you're pulling it to if you just grab it freely. GY or GX to bring it to this front. And you can kind of see now how that can light is playing out. GZ. And I'm just going to Shift D and duplicate this as well. And I'm going to hit the Y button to make sure it snaps. Shift D and then Y to snap it across. Okay, so you can start to see how this is coming together now. So we've got these kind of downlights happening here. I might just add a doorway to here. So this is where you're doing a bit of freeform stuff. So adding something there, a little loop cut there. Going to do a loop cut there. I might just go back to this mode so I can see that a bit easier. I might maybe I might just extrude these bits a bit. Over to there. Grab a little doorway. I'm going to extrude it forward a bit. I might just make the door the same as the roof, so I'm just going to click on that and assign. Drop that in a bit. Push that back a bit. And there we go, we've got our little door. So you can kind of see if we switch back, that's starting to look pretty nice and pretty finished. All right, so what we want to do from here is, the ground at the moment is perfectly flat. Nice little technique that you might want to employ is, with our loop cut over here, I'm going to zoom out heaps. And I'm going to shrink this plane down. Now, with the loop cuts, you can do the number of cuts here. So I'm just going to change that to 50. And you can see how that's cut that 50 times. If I flick back to the shading mode here. Now, what we want to do, this is proportional editing. Really cool tool that you're going to need to learn. Grab my face select here. And I'm just going to grab a bunch of random spots. We want to kind of make the ground lumpy. Over here is our proportional editing. I'm going to hit the G button. Now, because we've got proportional editing on, you can see that circle appears when I hit the G button. Now, I'm going to scroll wheel up to make that bigger. If you've just got a laptop, you're just pinching. Now, I'm hitting the Z button now, and you can see that that's kind of just making that ground look just that little bit lumpy. So see how it's kind of a bit more natural looking now. So if we were to go back to our edit mode here, let's make the ground a bit bigger. G and X, and we'll push that up forward a bit. Okay, so that's looking a little nicer. Now we're moving into our rendering stage. So what we want to do here, we're grabbing our camera. So our camera's still kind of faced over here. Little arrow there, view, camera to view. Hopefully you've familiarized yourself with that. I'm going to zoom out, and maybe that's going to be the view. If I uncheck camera to view now, I can actually zoom in, make the screen a bit bigger, then go back to camera to view. And then sort of fold that little thing back. So if we drop that down, I think that's a pretty nice angle. You don't really want to get into this. You haven't really done anything over here, so you can cut that from the, or crop that from the frame. I think that's looking pretty good. We're going to go into Photoshop later. I'm not going to do that in this segment to add some kind of trees and effects and some lighting. But in order to do that, we're going to go to our world properties. Oh, sorry. No. Our little camera here. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to go to film and click this little transparent button. So what that does is it means we can go into Photoshop and slot in our own sky later on down the track. Now, one more thing that we're going to do before we render is this snow here. We want to click a new material. Snow's a little bit reflective. So let's just bump up the reflectiveness a bit there. So you can kind of see that you've kind of got this slightly reflective snow now. So it looks just that little bit more realistic, let's say. So that's effectively it. We're going to go back, make sure we drop our samples probably down to 128, and effectively render image, click the render there. Let's watch that render out. And that's effectively it. So that's what you do to make your house. Obviously, you have a bit of a play. There's a lot more that you can do, but that's just effectively using the loop cut, the extrude tool. You've got your scale, you've got your grab tool, a couple of other sort of interesting tools that we use, like that inset tool, bit of proportional editing. We started to have a play with the transmission on the materials as well. But other than that, most of what you learnt in that first stage was applied here. So hopefully this has given you a bit of an idea about how you can use those really basic fundamental Blender tools and create something that's getting towards a nice professional finish. Look forward to seeing what you come up with. All the best.